Thank you all for coming. I see some of you still coming in. Always good to have an audience and people turn up. Very, very grateful. You can see I'm wearing the full creative sartorial affectation bingo. Got this from a Tate, if you want to get one of these. Kids bought me it. But still coming in. So what you'll notice is that you've got little sheets of paper. The little sheets of paper will become obvious as we go along a little bit. And hopefully you'll be able to participate in this, slightly unlike some of the other presentations during the course of yesterday and today. The first thing to say is this is not a talk. Well, it is a talk because I'm going to talk about 98% of the time. And I'm going to ask you to be able to do some exercises as well at the same time. The purpose of this really is to essentially take what I do as part of my D&AD Masterclass, which is a full-day session where we try to build a brand in one full day and condense it down into 45 minutes. Easy. It's more of really a work in progress. It's a work in progress because it's kind of condensing everything that I've learned into 45 minutes today, or a day if you're doing the full session. And it's also a work in progress because I'm not 100% sure it's right. I'm still working on it, and there's still things to add and things that I take away and things that I build on every single time. It's also a work in progress because last night I pulled my back out, putting my child into bed, and I'm on a tremendous amount of codeine. I also, because I'm on a tremendous amount of codeine, was on the Thameslink this morning and left all my notes that I'd written last night on the Thameslink. So I'm high on drugs, raw dogging this presentation. You may not enjoy it. I'm going to have a fucking great time. I'm currently Global ECD at Landor. I'm not going to show you a bunch of Landor stuff. Teemu, who is our Chief Creative Officer, is doing a presentation in a couple of hours' time. He's going to show you some amazing things. If you want to see some other things, go to the website. That's what it's there for. I don't come with just that background. I've been doing this for quite a long time. I started as a very, very bad product designer at Sony Europe. I got fired. I then went to work at Wolf Ollins, where I stayed for 18 years because I was particularly lazy, eventually becoming the chief design officer there. I eventually shifted and became a management consultant at McKinsey for 2.5 years, which had aged me very, very dramatically. At every single opportunity, I have cocked up on a daily basis. If you are just starting your career, that's fine. I've cocked up, but I've also been lucky enough to work with a tremendous amount of brilliant people at brilliant brands. These are just some of the examples of the brands that I've worked with. Fantastic people where I've learnt a lot. The whole point of this presentation is that it is about praxis, not thesis. I'm not here to kind of give you the answer. I'm here to hopefully give you some solutions that you can create your answers with. So here's my compulsory AI reference. Every single person has to have one in this entire session. Hands on the table, I think that AI is a fantastic tool. It's amazing. It's fundamentally going to change everything we do. This room will probably have half the amount of people in next year. That might not necessarily be a bad thing because you'll be going and doing other creative things in other creative avenues. I think it's going to be a tool that's going to help us do amazing creative work. And I think that because it's fundamentally a revolution. And revolutions are always good things. In the title of this, I called it Only Brands. It was a nod to OnlyFans. Don't worry, there is no nudity in this presentation. I'm not going to, nothing in my bio. I want to really make the point that actually we're at a time where creativity has never been more important. And I actually see that in content creators, and content creators in the very broadest sense of the term. Now, if you look back over history, lots of amazing people have created fantastic content at times of revolution. And content creators now are creating things from start to finish by themselves. They're doing it in ways where they're facilitating the entire process, and that's what I want to help you do today. In many ways, Mr. Beast is our Salvador Dali. Bevo, and if you don't know who Bevo is, please don't Google him, but Bevo is essentially our Sid Vicious. That could be a sad thing. I actually think it's a really, really good thing because it means creativity is back on the table. Now, the Dadaists, the punks, They called it kind of a three-chord trick. The three-chord trick is essentially taking everything that you know about the whole process of something and boiling it down to three things. And that's what we're going to hit on today. This is your three-chord trick. Some of you may think this is me teaching you to suck eggs. That's probably because it's not necessarily for you. If you're a younger person, you're coming up and you're learning how to do this stuff, these are the three things you fundamentally really need to know. And this is because this is about a how. There's plenty of people yesterday and today who will tell you what they've done and why they've done it. But this is going to be the how of how you can potentially do it yourself and do it all yourself. It's my how. You've got to interpret it for how you do things, but it'll give you a bit of a start. So, in the top of your mind, I want you to have a brand that you're going to work with today. This brand is going to be the one that you can use in the exercises that we're going to do. I'm going to choose a BBC. I'm going to choose a BBC because technically I own it, as we all do. I also worked on it very, very closely during lockdown. It was my lockdown project, was the rebrand of the BBC, and I love it. And I think it's a fantastic brand to work on. You can choose any. It's just an example. I think what we want is something big and substantial that you want to reinvent and needs to be reinvented. You're also potentially going to need a companion to work with, maybe to chat with. I'm going to give you little 30-second bursts where you're going to do some exercises. Feel free to have a conversation with the person next to you. You know when it's time to do that. So, these are the fundamental building blocks we're going to work on today. Now, there's one way of looking at this, which could be, this is essentially the strategy side, the copy side, and the creative side. That's not quite the point. The point is that if you have an understanding of all these fundamental building blocks, if you're able to do them by yourself, be you a strategist or be you a designer, you're going to be able to create a brand that is going to be able to have impact and live for a long time. Everyone ready? Good. This is quite unusual because normally during the session that I have, there's a lot of interplay back and forward, and it's a bit strange doing it to an audience that's kind of not able to talk back to me. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll send plenty of responses afterwards via LinkedIn. Please feel free. The first thing I'm going to do, and throughout this I'll try to give you tips as to things I've learned. Never read out a slide. Never, ever read out a slide. Reading out your manifesto that you've created on ChatGPT in a busy room on Zoom doesn't make it sound good. What you should do is always paraphrase, and the paraphrasing to this slide is really that essentially nowadays every brand has to have a point of view in the world. You can't just turn up. A few years ago I wrote basically an article that said that all brands should look at themselves and consider why they exist, and potentially 25% of brands should disappear overnight. I was wrong. It should be about 50%. There's way too many of them. Most of them don't have a purpose. Most of them are sub-brands that are just kind of worthless. Brands should have a point and a view on society. These brands do. These are really great brands. And often you'll find that the way in which they sum that up is through little titles, and there's lots of things like brand keys and wheels and all these different PowerPoint mechanisms to be able to capture that story. But the point is, you have to have a heart, and if the heart of your story, you need to have a point of view. The point of view is really, really clear for these three because you experience them every day and you know them, and this is how they behave. This is how they feel. And that feel point is really, really important. Lego is a perfect example of that. Lego is a brand that people love, and Lego is a brand that really has that kind of point of view completely nailed. It was not always the case. 2003, Lego wasn't necessarily in a brilliant place. They basically diversified beyond that brick to the point of where they kind of lost the point of what they were doing, and the badge was appearing on things which didn't necessarily sum up what Ole Kirk Christiansen, the founder, originally wanted, which is his idea of playing well, the idea that fundamentally Lego was there to be able to support people to play and invent and create. And what that meant was, for a brief period, 2003, 2004, Lego was a bit emo. Over time, they found a way back in, and that was because they had a really, really strong point of view, and that point of view was to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. That fundamentally captured what that founder was looking to achieve, and I don't know whether a couple of weeks ago you saw that amazing work that was done whereby they ran essentially an F1 race using these cars that were made of Lego, of a fantastic work. My wife actually works with this as well, using for STEM subjects, helping kids to understand code through Lego, because that brick is also a great metaphor for building of code. And then also making sure that they have that ability to bring in everybody. The diversity of having these Braille bricks is kind of a really interesting way of engaging with everybody and bringing everybody in to be able to understand and tell the story. And that had a massive impact. Essentially, it meant that while the global toy market was going down, they were going up. 50% of what they created in 2003 were brand new products, but they were brand new products based on that fundamental core. Now, obviously, the guys at Landau worked with them, but we weren't involved in that. That was done in a room somewhere, and frankly, I have no idea how it was done, because I wasn't involved, and nobody's ever told me. What I can probably guarantee, though, is that at some point in that discussion with that group of people, there was a Venn diagram involved. I guarantee it. This is a Venn diagram my mum sends to me when my life looks like it's going off the rails. She pulls it off her white woman's Instagram. Essentially, it's the same Venn diagram that every brand agency and every consultancy and every internal team have ever used to try to define what's the point of a brand. What are you good at? What does the world need? That is essentially it. They come in multiple forms. Mine comes as a heart, because if you'll notice, and you will continue to notice throughout this presentation, I like threes and I like blocks. So the brand heart is really, this is your first exercise, and this is what we're going to do. So hopefully, as I've been rambling on, you will have decided upon the brand that you want to work with today. And what I want you to do is just think about those two questions. Think about what is super special about that brand, and what does the world need right now. Then I'll give you an example of how I would approach it. Now, obviously, I promised there wouldn't be any kind of performance art or dancing. If you could don't dance to this next slide, I don't really know what's wrong with you, but I will give you 30 seconds to make just a few little notes. You can continue to build this out afterwards, but just to be able to start this process. Did anyone know that the clock does this afterwards at the end? No? There you go. Learn something every day. If that's the only thing you take away, at least you've taken away something. So here's what I would do. And again, I'm using the BBC more just as an example. It could have been anything. It could have been the NHS. It could have been the UBS example. But what's truly special about them is they're a public service, right? In a world where public service is becoming increasingly rare, they've got that storied heritage. They've been around for a really, really long time. And they've got that mantra of inform and educate and entertain. Now, one could argue that that is kind of their purpose statement, but I'm not sure whether that's useful enough to be able to create stuff with. We need a point of view that's a bit more emotive, that has the feels. On the other side of that, what have they got that the world needs right now? Well, the world certainly needs objectivity. It needs a bit more joy. It needs a bit more hope. It certainly needs diversity and inclusion, and it needs that reinforcement of why that's super important. Needs that spelt right as well. It needs humanity, and it needs that ability to be able to do things, which kind of led me to a space of like, look, in a world where you have the streamers who are looking for likes and clicks and views and looking for things from you, everyone else wants them, you to like them. Whereas actually maybe the opportunity here is we want you to know that we will love you. Now, I can see what you're all thinking. You're thinking, Moody, that's a bit long. It's a bit wordy. So this is what they call a callback, I believe, in kind of comedy circles. This is where a Lego brick can actually be super useful. And often when you're having discussions about words and language and the ability to be able to rationalize something down into a simple, really easy to get way of thinking, I find that this is a really, really useful tool. It's kind of riffing off a David Bowie way of looking at lyrics. Most statements are too long, right? Most statements are really generic. Every day, everyone, everywhere, always featuring these statements, right? Particularly purpose statements, which I know have become less popular, but they're all essentially the same thing. This is about how do you make something that's clearer and stronger. You add creativity to it, you add play to it, you add engagement to it. So the idea is here, and unfortunately, I can't afford to buy you all Lego bricks for today, so you've got little printed versions of your Lego bricks. The way in which we boil this down is to essentially take each individual letter, each individual word, and write those individual words on the bricks. You can then rearrange them, you can add them, and more importantly, you can work alongside people to be able to create a new way of expressing the brand, a new way of expressing a point of view for the brand. Now, you may want to just have a quick 30 seconds to do that. I'll give you another clock. Let me flip back and I'll give you the clock. See? Told you I'd get you working. So remember where I kind of got to with this. I kind of got to the idea that everybody else wants you to like them. We want you to know that we love you instead. That's the twist. And through the Build Back Better, I kind of ended up with a few different ways of boiling this down. Of like, could the whole point of view be summed up with the idea of we are in it for the love? Now, is it a tagline? Is it a purpose statement? It doesn't matter. Like, is it useful? Can it help you be able to make decisions in terms of creative, in terms of how you write things? Yeah, I think so. Because if you're an organization that are fundamentally all about being for the love of things, well, you'd put your content first. You'd put your talent first. You'd put your point of view on a word first. Equally, you could just be super declarative and say, look, we are a brand that just loves you, and make everything all about the viewer, the audience. So you don't ever start with us. You start with you guys. You start with the audience. That could be really passionate. I actually ended up with the idea that really what they are all about is showing the love and expressing that, expressing the love of talent, expressing the love of care and craft, expressing the love of journalism, the ability to be able to go to market and say, isn't this an amazing world, but these are the things you really need to know about it. So, first exercise. Basically, you need a point of view in the world, because if you don't have a point of view, it's not necessarily helpful to be able to create things and make things and tell stories on behalf of a brand. Section 2. So brand's personality is the thing that everybody forgets about. It's the thing that is always passed on to someone else. It's the thing that is really, really hard to define. It's the thing that, frankly, in guideline documents, rarely gets read and even more rarely gets understood. And actually, if you have a really good sense of the personality of your brand, then frankly, you can really, really do amazing creative work. Probably the most well-known example of that is Nike. Nike have a fantastic... Now, okay, they're not necessarily having a great couple of years, but that'll change. They'll come back. They've always have done. But their personality comes through when they tell stories, and their storytelling is second to none. Their ability to be able to tell a story and connect with people is amazing and gets people talking. And every single year here, there's normally an advert that people are like buzzing about. And that's because they really think about it and really push that storytelling side. And stories really help brands to do a few things. They help brands to build those connections, the connections with the viewer. They help drive understanding. They help people kind of fundamentally understand why you are in the world, reinforcing that point of view. And finally, they help give direction. They give direction to creativity and help the creatives understand how that brand needs to present itself out in the world. Storytelling is really kind of something that I love, and this book, you know, a few of you probably have read it. It's super interesting. Ironically, it's been plagiarized to death. Christopher Booker writes this around the idea that there are basically 7 basic plots of anything, any storytelling in existence for humanity. These are the 7, always useful to know. Overcoming a monster, that's basically every single Bond movie you've ever seen. Rags to riches, Aladdin. The Quest, Odysseus, or even more culturally relevant, Finding Nemo. Comedy and tragedy and the pairing of that, and the idea of voyage and return, which is very much a kind of a Alice in Wonderland spirit. And then rebirth, the idea that essentially we can do something but come back around and be reinvented and tell a slightly different story the next time round. I think one of the best examples of that, and one of my favourite films of all time, is Groundhog Day. All stories need heroes, and if you look at this, every single one of them has a hero. What's interesting, though, is that when it comes to brands, the brand shouldn't be the hero. In terms of brand storytelling, the brand is much more the groundhog than it is Bill Murray. And that's super important. And often, and too often, brands spend too much time telling the world what they're all about and not telling the world enough as to why individuals, people like us, should give a shit about them. And actually, that's a really fundamental thing, but it took me a long time to kind of understand, but it's kind of guided everything. And if we go back to the Nike example, that idea that, you know, their point of view, and they've got lots of statements, they've got lots of kind of missions and visions. I always kind of think that, you know, missions are for secret agents and visions are for kind of mystics, and they're not massively useful. I like a kind of tied up story, but point of view for Nike is that if you have a body, you are an athlete. They are the people who are behind this individual. They're not trying to be that individual or tell stories about themselves, and that's what's kept them going for so long. And it's also meant that they can tell stories sometimes whereby that's very, very explicit. So if you look at the top left-hand side, the storytelling that they do, where they're literally supporting individuals and the storytelling behind that, all the way through to using talent to support that story, all the way through to enabling me as a person to be able to get into the manufacturing process, to be able to make my own product, to be able to personalize it discreetly to what matters most to me. That's the true ability of what this allows them to do. This is some work, so Landor, as part of Landor, is Man vs. Machine. I love Man vs. Machine to bits, so any opportunity to kind of praise them and share their work is fantastic. But what I really, really love about this is that it actually really doubles down on that idea of the brand not being the hero. The hero is children, and this is all kind of a campaign around Max and kids. What's beautiful about it is that even in the creation of it, the idea was that these individual little characters were supported by the way in which kids think, the way in which kids draw, being able to bring it to life in a way that felt individual and distinct and smart, and also have that personality, have that ability to be able to tell stories, you know, about what really matters, which is the kids themselves. So when you go into a store, what's really great is it doesn't feel like it's Nike's version of kids. It feels like kids have taken over that store. It feels like the kids own it and they're the ones doing the storytelling. There's also just a really lovely process from a creative perspective the guys went through here in order to manufacture this, which was, you know, they had simple drawings that they began with that they ran through AI and then used it to develop and change things and create different kind of manifestations of these little characters. And I think the way in which it's been built is a really good example of how we're going to be using AI going forward. I think at the moment, there's too much conversation about AI being essentially doing two roles. So one is that AI will help to govern things. Well, that's obvious, right? Nobody really wants to write guidelines. Nobody really wants to sit there and do the kind of 100th iteration. That's a good thing, and it will benefit everybody here. On the other side of it, the act of creation, there's kind of the idea that AI will actually support us in making creative decisions and creative decision making. I think where this is interesting is this is offering up lots of different opportunities based on still that initial creative thought. Without that, you wouldn't have anything. I actually think increasingly there's going to be a third way as well. And that third way is essentially the AI being the mind, the brain, the personality of a brand, being able to make decisions based on a whole kit of parts as to how you show up. Now, deliberately, I've shown up today wearing my little novelty outfit because I'm talking about creativity, right? I've got my little glasses on from Cubits. I've got this from the Tate. Wax London. It's because I'm 46 years old, right? I need to do something. I think the point is that you turn up to different places as a human being, with the same personality inside, but with different clothing. I think AI can help us do that. I think AI will essentially support the ability for brands to turn up in the right way, at the right moment, at the right time, in the right clothes. That's the interesting bit. That's where it's going to become really, really exciting. I think that's a challenge, potentially, for internal brand teams who historically have been the arbiters of how that happens. And I think that's going to be interesting work over the next few years, working out how internal brand teams are able to support that and help people to be able to make that happen. But there's something really interesting there that could be super exciting. So this is all about brands behaving like a person. Here's another chart. It's my McKinsey practice coming back in. Never use this chart. This is the kind of Jungian personality traits. It's nonsense. It's just absolute nonsense, right? Can you imagine sitting next to someone or going to a party or sitting on a bus next to someone and them just being one of these things? Sitting next to the magician or the jester at a party? Gee, it would be awful. It would be like the saddest thing ever, and you would sit there and you would be so bored within a moment, because the fact is that people, and brands should be like this, have a whole wealth of influences, have a whole range of different kind of personality traits that they turn on and they turn off, a whole wealth of behaviors. We are an accumulation of everyone we've ever met and everyone we're going to meet. This doesn't let you do that. There's a guy named Nick Parker who is a creative writer. Nick down there knows the other Nick. He's created a really great brand tool that is a little bit more thoughtful on that. I recommend you look him up. I recommend that you buy his VoiceBox tool because it really helps tell stories. The point of that is it accepts the fact that there are multiple voices in a brand. It accepts the fact that you can be one thing on one day and another thing on the next day. And that's going to be increasingly important in this world. Everyone all right? Good. Okay, so this next exercise, this is where the stickers get involved, and I imagine these stickers are going to show up all the way around the Royal Festival Hall over the next day or so. So if we accept the fact that a brand personality needs to be something that's done in a fully rounded way, it helps to imagine that brand as an individual. It helps to imagine that brand as the cohesive whole of everything that brand's ever seen and done. And these archetypes that we've seen, like the Jungian diagram, tends to represent the fact that we tend to pigeonhole. So this is an aim of this exercise, is to try and make sure that you don't pigeonhole, that you try and mash things together and mash up characteristics. So in your pack, you will find, now there's a sad little story with this. So in order to create these packs, Tosh and Lucy, who work at Landor, were up very late last night running things through the printer. And I apologise to anybody in Sea Containers building, because I think about 6 or 7 printers on different floors now are jammed up with stickers. So sincerest apologies to everyone at Sea Containers, sincerest apologies to any clients who aren't going to get any presentation printouts today. But you guys have all got your stickers, so happy days. What I'd like you to do is essentially use those stickers to build a character. Build a character. There's a different head, there's a different eye, there's a different mouth. And they represent roughly, how the brand thinks about the world, how the brand views the world, and how the brand speaks to the world. And by combining them together in different ways, it will give you a photo fit of someone that ultimately can represent a hint at what your brand could potentially feel and look and sound like. It's actually based on a little game that my mum got me from years and years ago. It was a little Victorian game called Fizzog, which essentially used this kind of photo fit idea to be able to piece things together. So, you may want to chat to your little colleague next to you, but what I'd like you to do is create a single individual from these stickers on your page. Here we go. Cool. I realise I'm not giving you much time. This is because I'm trying to condense an entire day's session into 45 minutes. Luckily, we're doing pretty well in terms of time, so carry on fiddling with this while I talk you through what I did. Now, basically for the BBC, my example, it's just an example, I could just have put a big picture of Attenborough. I think everyone would have fundamentally agreed with that, right? But actually, when you start to break it down, there's some interesting things. So, what I liked about the idea of how they look about the world is there's sort of this infectious desire to share knowledge. Like Brian Cox has got this. Often presenters on the BBC, and particularly BBC Two, and there's kind of history programs, Hannah Fry and people like that, they have that desire to be able to tell stories and are really passionate about how they tell those stories in different ways. How they think about the world, well, I think there's something super interesting about the way in which they are passionate and truthful and honest. Now, whether that's the honesty through something like the news and that kind of ability to not be biased, or whether it's just the fact that, you know, deep down they are quite British and there's a British ability to be able to take the piss out of things and enjoy doing that. Well, in this case, kind of use Tracy Emin to be able to sum up that, because I think she's got that kind of rebellious spirit, and particularly as she gets into that kind of Grand Dame era, she's getting more so like that. And then speaks to the world like, well, I think this is something to do with globality. So this is the fact that, you know, that kind of pure, unfiltered, international Britishness. Someone like Adele's got that, right? She's got that kind of ability to be able to cut through, fill stadiums, be able to do things on a massive scale, a truly kind of British way. So that was my example of how I would pull that together. I imagine you've got some very weird-looking pictures right in front of you. 10 minutes left. We are doing well. One last exercise. So his third exercise is essentially doing the job of what you would normally think I would be talking about, which is brand identity. For years, I've kind of struggled a little bit with the term brand identity because of these kind of previous exercises and whether that's the identity side of it. Often you call it brand expression. I'm increasingly kind of calling it brand presence. Now, that's just me. You don't need to call it that. But like the idea is really that we need to think about the way in which a brand shows up in a much more broad way. I trained as a graphic designer. I love graphics. I love the detail of things. But some of it isn't quite as relevant anymore unless it's part of a much more joined up, thoughtful story. I work a lot with our product design team. I work a lot with our data team. All of our teams kind of work cross-functionally to be able to bring things together. And I think that's super important because that's how we see things. You don't see a siloed categorization of something. You see the end result. And when I first began, way back, it was all about consistency. Everything was about consistency. Now, shouldn't really say this, but I'm really not sure why Pantone exists, right? Like now. I get the idea of consistency, but the idea that you can kind of have such a limited amount of something, the reality is we see colour in different ways, right? We see things in completely abstract, fragmented manner. So the idea that we can just build towards consistency, I think is probably not something that's true anymore. And I think even very early on in my career, it was becoming apparent that consistency is not going to be the answer to creating a brand that is truly impactful and meaningful for people in people's lives. Do you remember Christopher Booker's book, way back at about the 20-minute mark? I'm writing a book, 3 years in now, still about only halfway through. The idea of the book was to be able to, in the same way that he created the 7 basic stories, is there 7 essential jump-off points for any kind of brand expression presence system? And I landed on 6. I haven't found a 7th yet. But the idea being that the stuff like the vessels, the vessel is a really good example of a kind of identity system whereby it holds something, allowing multiple stories to be told in one form. London 2012 is probably the most kind of explicit example of that. There are timelines, the ability to be able to flex and reveal stories in different ways. Motherboards, like the original PwC logo, which I still love, was able to kind of express different stories and be able to move, and change depending on what voice it was picking up. The shapeshifters. Shapeshifters are really summed up by MTV. MTV was the original shapeshifter, and for many years there were lots of them. The magic eye, smile in the mind. The idea that you can do 2 single things at once. The fact that that is just 2 words until you recognize the arrow that's sticking in the middle of it, which gives you that extra layer of meaning. And finally, human hands. The idea that you can take something and augment that core identity with that kind of gestural human touch. Now, these are all kind of still true to some degree, but the reason why the book production has slightly slowed down, other than the fact that nobody wants to publish it, is that I think it's increasingly becoming outdated. These are still just singing and dancing versions of logos. They're great, and a lot of them were incredibly successful at the time, and I think it starts to show that some of them are starting to be replaced and adapted even now. Because things have fundamentally changed. Things have changed even in the last 6 months, even in the last 3 months, that brands need to communicate a shed load faster than they've ever done before. Brands need to be able to tell way more stories in much more fragmented ways. They need to be fundamentally, at their very core, multisensorial. And we need to be flexible enough to invite participation, to invite communication, to invite people to meddle with them and change them. And really now, it can all be summed up in just how does the brand feel? A brand can exist solely on its sonic identity. A brand can exist solely on its textural identity in some cases. Like, how can a brand be able to create an impact on you that leaves resonance after you've met it, touched it, interacted with it? That's where the kind of really exciting stuff is happening now. And that means that you have to think about the branding of things in a much more multidimensional way. You think about it not from the brand projecting out, but from what people see, what individuals see, hear, what they touch. And sure, right, you're going to have all the things that we've always had on the right-hand side, the logo, the layout, the illustrator, all that stuff is great. You're going to need it. They're the bare elements. But it's how it connects to things like the tone of voice, to the sonic landscape, to those interactive moments of sound, the way in which it also feels, the UX, the UI, the virtual reality, the sensorial elements, the environmental elements, the physicality. And that's why, more than ever, it's not about just being a T-shaped designer. It's about being a fully multidimensional design, thinking about design in the broadest sense and not just limiting yourself to one side of that cube. There are many more, and there are things on the back of it we've never even experienced or expressed yet that are still to come. And that's why it's still exciting to be able to produce brands, and why, more than ever, we're going to be creating brands that are doing things that are genuinely different, brands that are building memory and building feeling rather than just telling people who they are. Elica was a good example of that most recently. I think this is in the D&AD this year. Elica make cooker hoods, right? Cooker hoods. It could be just a very straightforward branding exercise. Our Milan studio took that and said, okay, well, the thing about cooker hoods is that they live with you. They cook with you. They're there when the kids are screaming. They're there when you've run out of food. They're there when the house stinks or the alarm goes off. They're actually fundamentally part of your house as much as you are as well. And the story that was kind of built around that was built on this idea of the programmed art movement. And it sort of thought about how something as simple as a cooker hood could be a living thing. It could actually have a soul and express itself, which meant that then, visually, you start to get into a very, very different place. The whole visual language was built around the idea of breathing, being able to kind of think about that idea of going way more than just being a stamp, being something that could interact, that could play a role in your house, that could play a role in your lives. And that's what gets super exciting about the way in which the whole totality of a brand can tell a completely different story now for me. Which means that, yes, you have a beautiful looking mark, but you also turn up in completely different ways. So when the next brief comes into you, which feels like it's something that seems relatively straightforward, I think the idea is where we can find that twist. Where can we find that motion? I think this was an example from last year, the ability to be able to learn from the environment, and this whole visual system for Milan Orchestra was built around the sound of a brand as much as it was built around, how the building looks or the history of the brand as well. This is much more now about, the journey I've been on, I suppose, is shifting from brand as having IQ and being intelligent through to having EQ, being thoughtful and being empathetic. But it also needs AQ. That's adaptive quotient. It needs to be able to adapt to the environment it's in. It might change from the morning to the afternoon because it needs to turn up in a different way. One last exercise. We are so close. I just want you to quickly look at how the brand might turn up and tick a couple of the boxes of how your brand might be able to emphasize each one of those different points. So, just give you an example from my BBC example. I was thinking about Pride's coming up. How might you turn up at Pride? Well, it wouldn't just kind of run, that traditional thing of kind of running the flag through the logo. I think we moved on from that. Well, maybe it would turn up by celebrating that idea of showing the love, right? What if it showed the love in a way that was a bit like that kind of weird combination of people that I got, where you would turn up not just having billboards that said we support Pride, you'd actually just have a mark that celebrated on-screen chemistry. Tim and Dawn in the office, that's like epic. You could have 100 of different ways. The example on the left-hand side is actually the first same-sex kiss on CBBC. You wouldn't just kind of, tell stories about love stories on Radio 2. You might even start to create products to encourage people to come together. When they bring their products together, they have a different experience, an enhanced experience. You might even go as far as messing with the UX and UI to be able to add big love instead of likes to stories. So those are the examples. And I know what you're saying. You came here, and all I've given you is a Venn diagram, a mood board, and a list. That's true. It's true because it's always been true. It's true because it's fundamentally true. And whatever AI we get next year or next week, it will always be true that those three things, if you can hit them, will give you essentially the component parts to be able to create a brand that is impactful and meaningful. If you can make them all, and if you can make them connect, if you can build brands that are able to kind of respond and reflect to the environment, if you can build brands that actually have a personality and a point of view but don't dominate the conversation, if you're able to build a brand that has a genuine presence and is able to turn up in a way that is endlessly growing, adapting and innovating, you're going to be able to create amazing brands. And more importantly, if you as individuals turn up with a solid point of view, a personality, and a bit of a presence, you'll do a lot better. Good luck at your next meeting. Thank you very much.